Welcome to APPA's weekly webinar series. My name is Billy Zadek, Standards and Codes Administrator for APPA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APPA webpage later this afternoon. You'll receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as a link to our upcoming webinars. We have webinars planned out through May 2020 and are open for registration. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by our presenter. Professional continuing education credits and AIA CLUs are being offered. For AIA certificates, please send an email to Billy, B-I-L-L-I-E, @appa.org with your membership number. If you did not indicate you wanted a certificate during registration, just send me an email. Also, if you have more than one person attending this session from a central location, please contact me so everyone gets credit for attending. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Ruth Ann Manlett. Ruth Ann, take it away.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruth Ann Manlett. I am your current APPA president, and I'm also the associate director at the University of Minnesota. I am the co-author, co-editor for the operational guidelines for Custodial, along with Lynn Finn from the University of Iowa. Unfortunately, Lynn is unable to be on the webinar today, so I will be your mediator alone today, going over what we've been working on to prepare you for the 4th edition of the Custodial Guidelines. So I just kind of want to give you a brief overview of what we've been talking about and just to prepare you for that. So the course description, no matter if you are a custodial supervisor, a facility manager, or a facility officer, we know that we are increasingly pressed to identify improvements in value and deliver the services which align with and contribute to the primary mission. So we've spent some time along with the task force really looking at the upcoming APPA operational guidelines for custodial, because many of us have spent a lot of time in custodial. I grew up in the custodial world, and I'm sure many of you that are on the webinar with me realize that custodial is the first line of defense. Custodial is the one that makes the impressions when people come on our campus. So what we want to do in the 4th edition is provide new tools and techniques to help you estimate staff requirements, measure facility service delivery, and actually improve custodial effectiveness all over so that we can just demonstrate value to our upper administration. That is one of the things I feel is really important in the next coming years. So as we go through this, some of the learning objectives that we've been working on to ensure that we can provide that information for you is looking at custodial services best practices. We have a think tank in APPA, and what we found is many people have talked about custodial. They have many ideas, they have many best practices, but we wanted to get it in writing in a document, in a book, in a fast, easy way to look at innovative new ways of demonstrating the value in our custodial programs. So we're going to look at determining staffing recommendations, and we're going to do that based on unbiased information. So the team that has been helping Lynn and I, we've looked at the facts. We've really looked at what effective custodial programs look like. And in the process of doing that, we found out that sustainability initiatives are moving more and more into our organizations, and we need to make sure that they are more environmentally and financially sustainable. So you're going to see a big concept of that in our new edition in the chapters, and I'll talk more about that a little later. We are going to look at effective techniques about mentoring and how to lead our employees into the future. One of the things that APPA is working on is developing our employees, our members, into the future. What is that going to look like? So in order to do that, we need to look at improvement paths. And part of that improvement path is looking at our universities, our colleges, our institutional goals, and then figuring out how do we do that with the budget resources that we have. I know many of you have money just coming in, but there are some of us that are looking at how do we do more with less? How do we work with technology to improve and figure out what the next steps are? So as we go through this, I hope many of you on the webinar have participated, reviewed, looked at our editions. We're on our 3rd edition of the Custodial Operations Guidelines. And some of the things you're going to see us continue, of course, is we're going to continue to use the 5 appearance level services of custodial. And I'm sure all of you know what those are, but level 1 is orderly spotlessness. And again, the definitions will be in the book. Level 2 is ordinary tidiness. Level 3, casual inattention. Level 4, moderate dinginess. And then level 5, unkept neglect. We did spend some time talking about those descriptions, and we have made a decision that we are going to continue with those descriptions because we kind of are really branded in those 5 levels. You hear people talking continually about APPA levels and where does my custodial programs fit. So we're going to work on developing those, but making sure that our members can continue to use those. As I talked about, sustainability is becoming an integral part of our custodial services. So looking at those objectives, looking about how do we adapt our custodial programs to ensure that we are training, that we're understanding what organic waste is, and looking at the big picture of the sustainability that's happening in our programs. A big thing that we did hear about when we did some member surveys, which I will share with you in a little bit, is working on continuing to look at providing benchmarking, right? Looking at those recommendations and how do we benchmark against what we're doing and improving those benchmarkings. We're going to go over standards, and what we found out when we were looking at the books is sometimes when people are going through our books, it's kind of confusing on how do we do our standards. And what we want to do is provide information, easy templates so that you can develop your own standards. And there is a whole data team that's been working on that. And then last but not least, with the operational guidelines, we are going to make sure that we are coordinating common administrative and staff recommendations so that we are all talking the same language so that we can educate the higher administration so that we can prove that we have value and that the custodial program really does make a difference within our universities and our colleges. So for those of you, the history of the custodial operation guidelines has been around for a while, and it has been the premier written documentation for APPA. I know that many people have utilized this. I will tell you that I have read the 2nd edition. I bought it for all of my staff and read it many times just to make sure I understood. A couple times I read it and I had to call a friend to make sure I understood. So you're going to see us working on how do we make this a user-friendly book. But this trilogy gives, we really need to talk a little bit about the history of it because it's kind of important. So I'm really pleased to say that the original staffing guidelines just started with 5 APPA members, and they actually came from the MAPPA region, which is our Midwest region. It was 5 people that got together and talked about same common knowledge. They recognized that in order to have an effective custodial program, they should share ideas. And so I think about if we go back to the late 1980s to where we are now in APPA, we're still at that opportunity where we're still collaborating, we're learning from one another. Especially in the custodial world, you hear many people talk about, I know custodial, I can pick up a mop and mop the floor. Well, life has changed, and so sharing those ideas. So these 5 APPA members established and published the 1st edition in 1992. It only had 10 room categories. They just wanted to get started and have something documented. So in the process of doing this, they learned that there were more people that had a lot of information they wanted to share, they wanted to learn from each other. And I believe that is true now. And that's the same thing that we're trying to do, is not reinvent the wheel, not say that you need to do exactly what everyone else is doing in the custodial ranks, but that you'll share ideas. And then we're going to expand. We expanded it to the 2nd edition, which was published in 1997. And then what we found out is the 3rd edition in 2011 became part of the Operational Guidelines for Educational Facilities trilogies. So as I said, there's been thousands of copies of books that have been sold since 1992, and the levels of cleaning have been adapted and adopted by hundreds of the educational facilities. So we are going to continue with this amazing book and provide details of that. So I'm not going to go through all the contributors, but they have been working diligently on trying to make sure that we have relevant information. Many of these folks are experts in their field. What Lynn and I did when we started working on this book is that we wanted to make sure that we had all of our members represented. So we have private, we have public, we have K through 12s, we have folks working on housing, folks working on hospitals, authors from last edition. So these are the folks that are helping us. They are also open to hearing your viewpoints, suggestions, and I would also like to say, many of you on the call or on the webinar, we might have already tapped you to ask you questions because we are trying to make sure that we get everything that you need. So for that, I thank you for your participation, for those of you that are behind the scenes assisting us. So I'm going to just go over a few things to tell you about how we came up with the information to make sure that it's relevant. So there was a survey that was done last year. APPA conducted a survey. The Custodial Guidelines 3rd edition, like I've talked about, it was extremely popular and it's utilized by many APPA members. And it's proven to be a very effective approach to custodial operations. Again, it's kind of the document that gets you started. It's the how-to book. You can take that information and then you can adapt it to your organizations, and it makes you have the data when you go to upper management or your upper administration. So part of the survey, the respondents, the survey said they have used the guidelines for both technical information and narrative. But as you can see, some of the big focuses for custodial was that 77% of the folks that we surveyed are using it to determine custodial service levels. 72% are using it to determine staffing levels. So these are the two key things that are coming out of the custodial operations guidelines that our members are asking for. So as we dived into that, we are going to make sure that, again, like I said, it'll be easy to follow. Again, it won't have every category or service level that you have, but hopefully it will give you a template to get you started. Part of the comments that we heard from our members is, why are they picking up this custodial guidebook, and what do I need to know about custodial staffing? So again, I'm just going to hit on a few of them to help you with this, but help explain expectations to our staff. We know, being in the custodial world, that staff come and go. We have a big breadth of diversity in the custodial ranks. So making sure people understand what the expectations are, what a professional custodial program looks like. It's going to help with workloads and labor planning. And then one of the comments that I really appreciate is the survey used to educate upper administration, making sure that everyone is speaking the same language. So these are right out of our survey. I think about when I have folks here at the University of Minnesota, our customers that call and say, I've done custodial, I've cleaned my own house. When I tell them that the average square footage that a custodian cleans at the University of Minnesota is 34,000 square feet, it's kind of an eye-opening for them. So I appreciate that comment about educating upper administration. Some of the other comments that we got is survey requests for next edition. What are you guys looking for? How can we make this a book that will provide you with relevant information? So create a model to set a baseline, utilize production rates or time standards, focus on value versus cost. And then one of the things that we're really looking at is the custodial programs have changed, addressing industry trends. What's new? How do we make our programs more effective and efficient? How do we utilize technology? As we looked at a custodial program, we know that even in facilities management, change is the only constant, right? We are constantly dealing with challenges, and that's probably why we enjoy working in facilities management. But some of the things that are impacting our operations is shrinking enrollments. Many of our colleges and universities, they're concerned that students aren't coming. Well, if you take that into the custodial world, they really do have an impact. Custodians have a huge impact on recruitment. When a student walks onto our campuses with their parents, they're not going to meet a professor. They're walking through our hallways. They're looking at our grounds. They're looking at our restrooms. They're looking at our classrooms. So making sure that when we're setting up a custodial program, we understand that. Again, I talked about the advancement in technologies. I think of all the things that have changed in custodial, from actually auto scrubbers, right, sweepers that can run themselves. So figuring out how do we advance in technology in our custodial programs and making sure that we as industry leaders are ahead of the opportunities. Looking at remote sensing and data devices, those are coming. Looking at different international standards for facility service delivery. And then looking at the demands and expectations that are happening to us. Many of them are higher, and we are, like I said, doing more with less. We are also finding budget and resources are harder to find. We're finding it's hard to find staffing at times that want to come into the custodial ranks. So making sure that we understand the needs of the budgets and ensuring that we can get the right people in the right doors. When we looked at custodial, like I said, custodial has changed, and I think you really need to look at the core elements of a successful cleaning operation. What does that mean? And it really boils down to three things that Lynn and I decided to sum up, right? It's engineering. A custodial successful program, it talks about engineering, the standardization, the simplification, best practices, and ongoing benchmarking of a cleaning program. Making sure that we are the best in class operation. So running it like a business and understanding that the more data that you have, the better program you'll have. Looking at the science, the studies and research that validate engineering elements of the cleaning operation. Methods to improve safety and compliance with workplace safety laws, looking at the development of the workplace. What does the workplace look like for custodial? And we'll talk a little bit more about the community of custodial, the culture of custodial, and then looking at professionalism of our staff, the systems that enhance the value of appreciating cleaning workers in the overall building operation. Educating, again, skills, career path, and recognition programs. So that's the elements that we are focusing on for the custodial guidebook. And then the next few slides that I'm going to go through is just talking to you a little bit about our member survey, sharing with you what our members are looking for. So when you look at the slide that's up, you'll see custodial. Out of the 3 books, it shows that there is a need to have peer-to-peer learning, to have a how-to book on custodial. So you'll see that the publications at custodial, 77% of folks were utilizing this book. The most valuable, and I did talk about this a little bit again, is the technical side. They are looking at the narrative, but it really is understanding how do you set up a professional custodial program, the guidelines, the staffing calculations. So we asked our members why the custodial guideline? Is there a need for the 4th edition? And what are they utilizing these books for? So again, I'll just hit on a few of them, but the names for the levels of the custodial care are motivational and reflective of the results obtained through the resources applied. That plays right into our 5 custodial appearance levels. And like I said, you can talk to anybody and you'll hear people talking when you're at conferences. What level of APPA cleaning are you at? So people recognize that and they're measuring against that. They're frequently using the book as references. They're looking at space types, frequencies, and square footages. Again, these are things that we need to set up a custodial program. And then looking at full-time equivalent, the FTE-wise, to keep the campus to a custodial standard. What are our custodial standards? What are things that we can charge for to bring revenue into our custodial programs? And then the last one, I use these guides for several purposes, including bringing my staff up to speed on expectations for their positions. So looking at the big picture of the program. Continuing with what the members said about what we need for custodial is that we want to ensure that our programs are within the basic standards of operation and also to show our administrators how we compare to others in the industry. It's one of the best things that APPA has is the peer-to-peer learning. We are sharing resources. We are all, no matter private or public, right, K through 12 or large community colleges, we are running professional custodial programs and we share ideas. Staffing calculations and level of cleanliness. I help it to set a way to quickly educate upper administrators and have everyone speaking the same language. And then the last comment we got out of the survey, knowing what to do rather than if or why to do it has been our situation. So if you walk in, you can pull out this document, this written document, and it's kind of a starting ground for you. It tells you what other folks are doing and how we can utilize that information. So how do we use this, right? So we're looking at determining the levels of service, like I talked about, determining the appropriate staffing levels, informing leadership, identifying best practices, and then again, justifying our budget. All of this seems pretty simple, but we all know that when times get tough, trying to educate administrators on how important a custodial program is, how it makes a difference on our campus. They are the eyes and ears of our operation. They're the ones that are out there interacting with the visitors, with the staff. So how do we develop them? How do we treat them? How do we ensure that we are all being consistent? So it's exciting that people are utilizing it this way to help us. Okay, what's important to our members? And when you look at this, it talks about the total cost of ownership being the top thing. So what is the big picture of running our custodial program? What's the big picture of running a facilities management department, right? Why have an in-house or contract out of custodial? And some of you may be contracting out. So how do you ensure that you're making sure that you're following the university's mission? Staffing, workforce development, new trends, doing more with less, like we talked about, and then influencing technology. So you can see what's important. You can see how facilities management, especially custodial, is changing. In a lot of universities, custodial is one of the largest departments. At the University of Minnesota, we have approximately 500 custodians. Like I said, they clean about 34,000 square feet, $25 million budget for the custodial program. So it is a big portion of what we do here at the campus. So understanding the total cost of ownership is important. So when we were looking at this, we wanted to make sure that when we set the guidelines, we would make sure that we understood what is important, what's the next step. So here's what we heard. Provide any comments for improving. As we work on the 4th edition, the team has spent a lot of time making sure that we have the most relevant information. So this is what you're going to see us focus on, and then I'll go into more details on what the next chapters will be. But we're looking at how do we develop a strategy for reducing cost and increasing service levels. So if you just sit back and think about your custodial program, we need to figure out how do we reduce those costs. But people want us to reduce the costs, but they want us to increase the service level. So what things could we perhaps generate revenue, right? Where can we be more efficient? We're going to look at more best practices. We're going to share information, share data and metrics. There are technical apps that are out there, so you're going to see us share best practices on more technology apps and how you can utilize those in a custodial program. We're going to discuss industry trends as a whole and make sure that we understand the differentiation between public and private, if there is, making sure that we have sample forms, various templates that you can utilize or at least start from so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. One of the things that we heard is people really like to see examples, right? More examples of what other universities, colleges, what are your peers doing, and how might I implement that? So the new edition will have more examples, so that's what people are looking for. We'll have a little bit more detail of explanation of standard team cleaning. We did bring that up, of course, in the 3rd edition, but maybe looking at how that has evolved and how are we saving money with team cleaning, and maybe talking about starting the team cleaning, what are some of the lessons learned. People asked for real life day-to-day scenarios. And like I said, examples of how to best complete tasks. So those are the things that we heard from our members that they would like to see in the next edition. So as I move forward into the chapters, this is some of the things that we are bringing new to the new book, to the 4th edition. So we recognize that we all do know about staff development, hiring, and training, and that sometimes when budgets get tight, they cut training. But talking about how do you take your front level staff that sometimes are walking in and out of the door, like I've talked about diversity, they might be the lowest paid level staff, and talking about how do you develop them? How do you make them the future leaders? How do you talk about hiring, hiring for attitude, right, or technical, and then getting that hands-on training so that when you do have an event on campus that you are up to date on the training. So we're going to have a new improved chapter just on the overall culture and staff development. We are going to talk about the difference of various community colleges, K through 12s, looking at an application chapter on how does that impact custodial if you're at a K through 12, or if you're working at a museum, or if you're in the healthcare, or if you're at a private public college. So there'll be a whole chapter just focusing on those areas. And then I think the biggest thing that you're going to see that's new for us is that we're going to spend a little bit much more time on making sure that we understand the importance of measuring a custodial program and utilizing it as a validation tool. The more data that you have, the more defined your program can be. So spending some time showing you some examples of how do you measure your custodial program so that you can validate it. Many of us are already doing quality assurance programs, but what do you do with that information? What technology apps are you utilizing? When you're getting that information, what are you doing with it? Are you providing metrics for it? Are you providing data for it? So a whole chapter on working on quality assurance programs. And then hopefully between measuring and quality assurance, we're going to work on the importance of defining effectiveness in our custodial programs. So those three bullets are going to come together just because we believe the importance of data and making sure that we can validate our custodial program. In that, you'll see a chapter where we're defining what is your department? What does it mean? Why do you need a custodial program? Be it in-house or contracted out, how does it play at the universities and colleges, and how do we define the importance of our department? And then looking at the leadership and planning of the importance of making sure that our leaders are planning with custodial programs and that they understand that they are role models, that they need to be out in the field and taking their steps to developing the future leaders. Additional highlights that we have talked a lot about customer service, but it's just not what you do, but how and when you do it. And then we really want the importance of completing the feedback circle. So when we're talking about in the custodial world, you'll hear people say 9 times out of 10, I do not get comments, positive comments. And I think that has really changed. The more that we educate, the more that we interact with our customers, the more that we have a defined custodial program, I think people appreciate what we do. Like I said, the campuses, the custodians are our eyes and ears. They're the caretakers of our operation. They're the ones that are actually out there with the customer. So we've had a chapter talking about customer service, but again, you'll see us do some highlights on just improving customer service and some helpful hints. And then compliance and sustainability. We're going to update, recognize the latest standards and expectations, ensure that we have comprehensive compliance checklists, and then I think we've talked a lot about leveraging technology to improve sustainability. Technology is one of the biggest new trends in custodial. It's been there for a few years, but we are really seeing technology enhance facilities management. We actually have a group at APPA looking at how is technology impacting facilities management, and there are lots of tools for custodial that we're going to bring into the 4th edition to share with you. Additional highlights, we talked about the importance of developing your staff. So we're talking about how to prepare your custodial staff for advancement opportunities, looking at, again, defining the future leaders of the organization and investing in those folks. Having relevant updated position descriptions so that when you open our documentation, that we can make sure that it's relevant position descriptions. And then some of the things that we heard about the book and that we're working on is that we want to make it user friendly. So looking at outlining every figure so that it's easy reference. You will see us working on the benchmarking. We are going to have some matrices in the book, just like the 3rd edition, but we're going to try to make it a little easier for you to find and understand. So we're open to ideas on those of you that have been utilizing that book to share that with us. And then again, useful appendixes for easy definition resources. We want you to be able to pick up the book, have the information that you need without having to spend a lot of time. Kind of that go-to book. And then if you want to, you can dive into a little bit more details. A couple of the other things that we have focused on, and I think one of the the first bullets, I think we're really realizing that the custodial culture, it takes a really good leader to understand that there is a community and a culture in custodial. And so we're gonna talk about what does that look like? How do you motivate? How do you recognize staff? with, of course, a limited budget. And so looking at the culture, like I said, we are dealing with lots of different cultures in custodial, and in understanding and taking the time to learn about those individuals. And then the definition of critical factors, what's important in the custodial world. So we're going to have some highlights on that. Setting a baseline for improvement. The one we always talk about, communication, but we do really, in looking at the book, we want to ensure that we are constantly improving our communication, making sure people are talking the same language. Measuring our results are extremely important so that we can have continuous improvements. And then, like I alluded to, when you're going through the hiring process, looking at the custodial program and making sure that you're taking the time to hire for attitude. You need to get the right team members on your team. You need to create that culture, because like I said, they are the eyes and ears. They are the people that are out there day to day. And the more high performing custodial program you have, the more effective a custodial program you'll have. So to kind of sum up a little bit about the book, and you know, when I think of custodial, I think of a lot of this stuff seems like it's simple, right? It's not that hard to do, but the more scientific we can be, the more data we can have, the more that we can share information. So when we looked at this book, really what we're trying to do is provide you a basic guide to continuous improvement for facility services using many different methods, whatever might work for you. You might look at your program and say, I don't do that this way, but it's the kind of the starting point. So just looking at different ways that peer-to-peer learning, which is extremely important. When we formed our task force, we really looked at the original authors. We have authors that have been involved from the very beginning, but we also wanted to make sure that we are getting you new information. So a breadth of knowledge from the custodial aspect. We have the original authors, and then we have new authors. We have folks that are 2-3 years in the facilities world to people that have been there 40, 50 years. Just making sure that we can get the breadth of knowledge. So they are experienced pros at what they do. The content is powerful. It's just it's setting the guidelines. So we're pretty excited about the 4th edition. We're looking forward to it coming out in 2020 with details. So you know, we thought about why are we doing this and what's it all about? Why do we care so much about custodial, and why as an organization is there such a need? And really what it sums up for me is it's about respect for your department. It's understanding that those people that are out on the front line are professionals, right? And enhancing our professionalism. If you think about what they do day to day, if you think about the data that goes behind it, the technology that we use, that we really want to create a program that we can increase credibility. We continually want to make sure that we are educating and learning new skills, because I've heard people say, oh, it's just custodial and it doesn't change. That's not true. It's what we do. These are skilled workers. And you know, if you think about how much we spend on an auto scrubber, making sure that they're trained. I still think of when we had a water event on my campus or a flood, watching people watch us as a team come together, and the comments that I got, that how professional, how high performing we were, how we handled a broken sprinkler head within seconds, and it didn't really impact our business school. So looking at learning new skills, keeping up to date on skills, and then I think one of the things that in a custodial program we continually need to look at is driving with data versus emotion. We need to provide data to our customers, to our upper administration, so they realize what square footage we do, what custodial service levels are, what a service level agreement is, and then putting those concepts in common language so that we can track our progress. Telling your story. In anything that we do in facilities, we need to be able to tell our story, and the most important way we can tell our story is information needs to be data driven. You need to have the facts. You need to talk about the benchmarking that we do. We need to talk about what our custodial standards are, what our levels of service are. We need to publish what we're doing for learning and growth and our goals so that we can develop a high performing staff, and that we are always realizing in custodial that it's a work in progress. We continually need to sharpen our saw, which we need to do with ourselves. So Those are kind of the focuses that you'll see us focus on. I want to give you some additional resources. There is a lot of information out there about custodial. I just highlighted a few items where these were articles from the Facility Manager magazine. There is a breadth of knowledge in custodial, and we're more than willing to share it. So you can go on APPA's website, and you can pull up any of these articles. If you are interested in being an author, please let us know. I believe the most important thing that we can do is share information and grow from one another. Sorry about that. The other additional thing I wanted to talk to you about is we created an online community engagement platform, and it really does focus on sharing ideas. And so I know there is a big need out there to share information about custodial. So this does not take you very much time. APPA was founded in 1914, and we are trying to cultivate a community of peer-to-peer learning so that we can develop the future leaders. So please take time to go sign up for our online community. There, could be a group that just talks about custodial, just like we're doing in the operational guidelines custodial book. So with that, I thank you for your time, and hopefully we could entertain some questions. So I'll turn it back to Billy.
Okay, thank you, Ruth Ann. We do have questions for you. There are many universities now using contractors for housekeeping. QA has become very important in checking their work. Will more information be included in the next edition?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a very good comment, and I did not talk about that, but we did have a conversation about in-house versus contractors, and I will definitely take that information back to make sure that we dive into that a little bit more, but absolutely, great question.
Okay, thank you. Our next question. With a level of complexity and sophistication of the high-tech custodial equipment, are you seeing a greater need to include this equipment in the facility department's CMMS to optimize equipment maintenance, track maintenance costs, etc.?
These are great questions, and I do know that in our CMMS here at the University of Minnesota, we have absolutely done that, but we did not think about that in the book, so that might be something to add to the book. But yes, to answer your question, I think a lot of universities are utilizing the CMMS systems to track their equipment, to provide preventative maintenance for the custodial equipment. And like I said, we didn't, that's not in the book. So yes, we'll add that to the book, but excellent question.
Is there like a month or a quarter of when the 4th edition will be available next year?
Well, I wish I could answer that question. I can tell you that we are diligently working on that. I do not have a month, but I do know that we're slated for 2020. We have a couple more chapters just to finish up, and then it'll go into final editing with Lynn and I, and then Tom Becker. But I would say you're going to see it, in the middle part of 2020 is our goal.
Okay, thank you. Two topic areas that I don't see covered are green cleaning and recycling and waste management programs. Would you consider including these topics more specifically in your 4th edition? And just go ahead.
I was going to say yes, and that's part of our sustainability chapter. So we are talking about organic waste. We're talking about green cleaning. But I would love to hear more information from the person on what they'd like to see. But yes, definitely, we thought that would be in the sustainability chapter.
Okay. You referenced leveraging remote sensing in one of the slides. Please explain how technology is being leveraged to support the custodial program.
So I guess some of the things that we talked about is smart buildings, and just looking at, how does that impact custodial. So diving into that in a little more detail of how does the smart building light occupancies, could the custodians be using some kind of tracker? So kind of on that focus, and I know I'm not answering the question very thoroughly for you, so I might need to get a little bit more details on that, but it really had to do with smart buildings and figuring out how would we use that data-driven devices to help improve the efficiency.
Okay, thank you. And I will forward all of these questions to Ruth Ann, and she'll get back to the person asking the questions with a more detail. Has there been any benchmarking with business partner best practices and case studies offered by them?
I do not have the answer to that question. I cannot think of any business partners that we have case studies with. Right now, we've been doing more peer-to-peer learning with our universities and colleges. So I will have to dive into that and get you more details on that one, Billy. I can't think of any business partners best practices case studies that we have coming in the 4th edition.
Okay, thank you. How soon will there be webinars describing the new content and how to move through the book? Generally help schools that want to move to the next level of professionalism.
As soon as we have that book done, I think you'll see us start to work on that. I know at one time we also started, we had a concept of using our our learning platform to kind of walk you through how to do benchmarking, but I don't have a timeline on that, but I know we have talked about that on, you know, what are the next steps once we have the book, using webinars, because I think this is a perfect venue to walk you through. So I think some of the comments that we have heard, and we're being very diligent about it, is our custodial books have a lot of information, but making them user friendly and making sure that they're not complicated, and making sure that everybody understands the concept. So I do look forward to webinars. I don't know to tell you a timeline yet, but as soon as we get the book finished, I think you'll see us working with Billy on setting up webinars, because I think that's a great venue.
Okay. You use the term engineering for items that I would classify as part of quality management system. Engineering usually implies a physical element. Would you consider changing this term or delve into how a quality management system can assist custodial departments to standardize their practices, document their practices, procedures, and continuously improve?
Yes. I think when we did some research, I think, and I'm pulling back to when I talked about the core elements, when we talked about engineering, yes, we could definitely look at different terminologies. What we were trying to get across is making members understand the importance of treating custodial like a business and treating it that there is an engineering part, standardization. But yes, we could look at the terminologies because it is about the quality of the program. So would love to entertain more conversation with this member about that.
Okay. What types of environmental sustainability initiatives will be highlighted in the new guide?
Can you read that question again, Billy?
What types of environmental sustainability initiatives will be highlighted in the new guide?
So I think one of the other members talked about when we were looking at sustainability, we were looking at talking about green cleaning, about organic waste, about waste management. So those were some of the focuses that we were talking about with sustainability.
Okay. Dealing with legacy issues within our custodial department has been a big problem. Changes are necessary, but a lot of custodians are not willing to give their buy-in. Will the book include this topic?
Yeah, that plays into the chapter, and you kind of hit on it perfectly, where we talked about understanding the culture of the custodial program and educating and talking about the big picture so that we can help with getting our staff to understand and to buy in. So I think you'll be pretty happy with the culture piece of our chapters, because it really is diving into what you're asking about, understanding just how a custodial operation works, but making sure that we are educating folks and figuring out how do we leverage them, how do we develop them, how do we get them to realize that things have changed in custodial, and that in my mind they are custodial engineers, maybe not a right play on words, but getting them to realize that they are professionals and that this is a trade.
Okay. With budget cuts in our immediate future, we are looking closely at composting and recycle programs. How are others addressing or planning for these realities?
That's a good question. I think many of us are dealing with budget cuts and looking at the efficiencies of our custodial program. Your comment about the recycling, I'm going to have to kind of dive into that, but I do know that our task group, we have talked quite a bit about how do you utilize the budget cuts that are happening, how do we show value in our program, but also how do we leverage the items that we have. So again, I might have to dive into this one a little bit more to answer your question completely.
Okay. With any QA section, will there be anything in there to show how many QA inspectors it will take to inspect areas?
Yes, absolutely. In the quality assurance, we're going to look at square footage, we're going to look at how many inspectors, we're going to look at types of space along with the technology. And then one of the big pieces also is we heard a lot about people are doing quality assurances and they're measuring that they're doing those quality assurances like expected. They're supposed to do 5 a month or whatever it may be, but then they're not utilizing that data. So yeah, you'll see a whole function of how many do we need? How does it work? How do we make it effective and efficient? How do we measure against it?
Okay. Do you believe hiring for aptitude instead of skills is effective for custodial?
I personally believe that. I do think our task force has looked at that. I think that when you look at the culture of the custodial program, and talking about teaching them that they are the eyes and ears, that they do truly make a difference in our organizations. Learning how to train them on the skills, if you have a good training program, I think is easier to do than getting them to understand the culture of custodial.
Okay, thank you. Can you talk about credentialing or certification in custodial?
I'm wondering if you're asking about our certification program or if you're asking more details of that, but part of our credentialing program, we do hit on some custodial. If you're looking at a different credentialing for custodial, I'm not sure how to answer that question for you, but part of our CEFP, our Certified Educational Facility Professional, we do talk about the breadth of custodial and the importance of it, and that is part of that certification program.
Okay. In the QA section, will it include a frequency for inspecting offices, classrooms, etc.?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Could you provide a definitive recommendation for the use of disinfectant, or is a sanitizer such as ozone enough?
You're asking me lots of technical questions there. I'm not able to answer that question at this time. Again, if we had a conversation, I got some more information, we could talk about that, but I think there's 2 ways of thinking about that.
Okay. Does the guideline address different shift times for custodial staffing and how to engage night shifts and keep them motivated?
Yes, and that is one of the things when we talked about unbiased. We've been looking at a lot of facts, and there are a lot of programs that we have looked at where daytime cleaning is very successful, and there's pros and cons to both days and nights, but understanding how to motivate them, understanding how to track their time, and that might also go to the comment that one of the webinar folks talked about is using some of that data, some of those devices that we have. But yes, you will see us talk about just setting up a custodial program and what we believe the effective ways to do it. But to answer your question, I think that's all over the board, and it depends on your program. But having the details and the clear expectations can be very beneficial.
This question is probably more for Steve. Are there plans to have the book translated into other languages?
Hi, this is Steve Glazner, no, not at present, but we're certainly open to that. We've had initiatives in the past with some Spanish language and other publications in French and even Arabic, but we haven't talked about that specifically, but are certainly open to it.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, we have campuses at multiple cities and towns throughout our province. Will there be something in the new book to help implement consistency at all these locations? As you know, there are many personality and legacy issues you will need to address to make things consistent.
It's a great question and a great concept. We had not thought about that, and I think that would be a great thing for us to add. So I appreciate that comment. We talked about different hours. We've talked about different culture. We've talked about, the day shift versus the second shift, but not multiple cities. So would love to entertain that more. And yes, I would like to add that into the book.
Okay. Is the athletic facilities covered in the guidelines?
Yes, not in a lot of detail, but yes, when we're talking at different types of spaces. So many of us have a department, that athletics that takes care of it, but there's a small piece about athletics. If you think that we need more detail, again, we could talk about that. But yes, but very brief.
Okay. You talked about educating upper management. Is there information in the book about management staff sticking to core competencies and how many people a supervisor manager can effectively oversee, and how to most effectively use their time and resources?
Yes, that is absolutely, we are definitely focusing on that in the book. It's really about educating and talking about our programs and sharing the data. That really plays into us talking about data-driven decisions. So showing them the types of square footage we clean, the budget that it takes us to run a custodial program, looking at our supplies and our labor costs, and using that information to be educated when you are talking to upper administrators. So a lot of focus on that in the book.
Okay. There's a couple of questions here that I'll be sending directly to Ruth Ann for answering. We have one final question here. How much collaboration is there between APPA and the vendors that supply custodial equipment and supplies?
So in APPA, we have many business partners that sit on committees for us. With this particular task force, we didn't utilize a business partner on the task force, but I do believe that there are unsupported folks that we are calling and asking details of the questions. And we see them as our partners in APPA, and so they have a breadth of knowledge. And so I do believe there's collaboration, thorough collaboration with them, but we did not put a member on the task force. So that might be something Lynn and I could also add. But I do know that they definitely provide us a lot of information, and we believe that, couldn't do this without them.
Okay. Has the APPA FPI program been addressed as a strategic tool for custodial?
Yes, and it's starting, and I believe that our FPI folks are working on that. There's not a lot of that in the book, but definitely when you're doing the FPI, custodial is a big part of that. So we are starting to work on that.
Okay, and we have one final question here. Would you consider doing a webinar on performing an APPA school inspection?
Oh, yes, great idea. Tell me more about that. Let's talk.
Okay, do we have, that's the last of our questions. We have another one. Is there any plans for service levels within kitchens or cafeterias? I'm thinking,
cafeterias. Yeah, Yep, as I'm gonna say yes, there is, and I will have to look that up, but I know that we talked about cafeterias, and I will have to work with our data team, but I believe that there is, but I will double check for sure. I know we focused on kind of our core things, but I know people talked about cafeterias, so I believe
Okay.
so.
And just as a general announcement, the webinar is being recorded. It will be available later this afternoon on our website. And I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedule to attend the webinar today. This is our last webinar until February. So I want to wish everybody a very happy holiday season. Ruth Ann, Steve, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to do this webinar. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.